What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors walks onto a daytime talk show stage and gets blindsided by a host who refuses to let him speak? It only took 33 seconds of Joy Behar talking over Pedro Pascal before the entire set erupted into chaos that nobody saw coming. The cameras were rolling that morning at The View, and the studio audience had packed in tight, excited to see Pedro Pascal promote his latest project. He walked out with that signature warm smile, waving to the crowd as they cheered. The energy in the room felt electric. Joy Behar sat at the table with her fellow hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Sarah Haynes, Alyssa Farah Griffin, and Sunny Hostin. Everyone seemed ready for what they thought would be a typical celebrity interview. Pedro settled into his seat, and before he could even get comfortable, Joy jumped right in. "So Pedro, let's talk about your comments from last week," she said, leaning forward with a look that made it clear this was not going to be a friendly conversation. Pedro's smile faded just a little. "I'm sorry, which comments are you referring to?" he asked politely, genuinely confused. Joy waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, come on. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The interview where you said that actors today have it harder than ever before. That's pretty tone deaf, don't you think?" The audience went quiet. You could feel the tension starting to build. Pedro shifted in his seat, keeping his composure. "Well, I think if you look at the full context of what I said..." "The context doesn't matter," Joy cut him off sharply. "You're a millionaire complaining about having a hard job. Do you know how that sounds to people who are struggling to pay rent?" Whoopi Goldberg tried to step in. "Joy, maybe we should let him explain what he meant." But Joy was not having it. "No, Whoopi, I think this is important. These celebrities need to understand that they live in a bubble." Pedro took a deep breath, his jaw tightening slightly. "Joy, with all due respect, you didn't let me finish my thought. I was talking about the mental health challenges that come with constant public scrutiny and social media harassment. I never said we have it worse than people struggling financially. Those are two completely different conversations." Joy rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please, mental health. Everyone's got mental health issues now. It's become an excuse for everything." The other hosts looked shocked. So Sarah Haynes' mouth actually dropped open. Sunny Hostin put her hand up like she wanted to say something, but the words seemed stuck. Pedro's expression changed completely. The warmth drained from his face. "I'm sorry, did you just dismiss mental health as an excuse?" His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. "I'm saying that people throw that term around too easily." Joy doubled down, her voice getting louder. "Back in my day, we just dealt with our problems. We didn't need therapy and safe spaces." Alyssa Farah Griffin finally found her voice. "Joy, I don't think that's fair." "I'm not finished," Joy snapped at her own co-host, not even looking in her direction. She kept her eyes locked on Pedro. "You actors make millions of dollars to play pretend. And then you want sympathy because someone said something mean to you on Twitter. Give me a break." Pedro sat up straighter, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "Joy, I came here today to talk about a project that means a lot to me. And instead, you've ambushed me with a distorted version of something I said, refused to let me explain myself, and now you're mocking people who struggle with mental health. Is that really the kind of conversation you want to have on national television?" The audience was dead silent. Some people looked uncomfortable. Others were leaning forward, captivated by what was unfolding. Joy let out a bitter laugh. "Ambushed. This is a talk show, Pedro. We ask tough questions here. If you can't handle that, maybe you should stick to your scripted lines." Whoopi tried again. "Joy, come on. Let's just..." "Whoopi, stay out of this," Joy cut her off again, her hand slicing through the air. Pedro stood up slowly, and you could see every person in that studio watching him. "Tough questions are fine, Joy. I've done hundreds of interviews. I've answered difficult questions about politics, about my family, about my career. But what you're doing right now is not journalism. It's not even a conversation. You're attacking me for something I didn't say. You won't let me respond. And you're being disrespectful to your own colleagues. Joy stood up too, matching his energy. Disrespectful? You want to talk about disrespect? You come on this show acting like you're too good to be challenged. I never said that. Pedro's voice rose for the first time, his accent getting thicker as his frustration grew. Not once have I said anything like that. You are putting words in my mouth and then getting angry at me for words I never spoke. Sarah Haynes looked at the producers off camera, her eyes wide, clearly wondering if someone was going to step in. Sunny Hostin had her hand over her mouth. Alyssa Farah Griffin was gripping her note cards so tight they were bending. Joy pointed her finger at Pedro. I have been doing this show for over 2 decades. I don't need some actor telling me how to do my job. And I don't need some talk show host telling me that mental health doesn't matter, Pedro shot back, his voice firm and clear. You have a platform that reaches millions of people, and you just told them that struggling with mental health is making excuses. Do you understand how dangerous that is? The audience started murmuring. And some people were nodding. Others looked shocked at the boldness of Pedro's words. Joy's face was turning red. Don't you dare lecture me about my platform. I have used this show to advocate for important issues long before you were famous. Then act like it, Pedro said quietly, and somehow that quiet response landed harder than any shout could have. Act like someone who cares about the impact of her words. Whoopi stood up and put her hand on Joy's shoulder. Okay, I think we need to take a break here. But Joy shrugged her off. No, we don't need a break. What we need is for guests to show some respect when they come on this show. Pedro laughed, but there was no humor in it. Respect? You have shown me nothing but disrespect from the moment I sat down. You twisted my words. You talked over me. You dismissed an entire mental health conversation, and you snapped at your own co-hosts when they tried to mediate, and you want to talk to me about respect? The studio was so quiet, you could hear the cameras moving. Joy crossed her arms. If you don't like how I conduct my interviews, you're welcome to leave. Pedro stared at her for a long moment. You could see him processing, deciding. Then he reached down and unclipped his microphone. You know what, Joy? I think I will. Sunny Hostin gasped. Sarah Haynes put her hand to her chest. Alyssa Farah Griffin looked like she wanted to sink into her chair. What are you doing? Joy demanded, her voice getting shrill. Pedro carefully placed his microphone on the table. I'm choosing not to participate in whatever this is. I came here in good faith to have a conversation, and you turned it into an attack. I don't have to sit here and take that, and neither does your audience have to watch it. He turned to the other hosts. Whoopi, Sarah, Sunny, Alyssa, I'm sorry you had to witness this. You all tried to help, and I appreciate that. Then he looked back at Joy. I hope you take some time to think about what just happened here. Joy's face was bright red now, her hands shaking slightly. You can't just walk off my show. I'm not walking off your show, Pedro said calmly, already moving toward the edge of the stage. I'm walking away from someone who has forgotten that the people she interviews are human beings, not punching bags. A producer rushed onto the stage, looking panicked. Pedro, please, can we just... But Pedro was already walking. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. A few people started clapping, then a few more, and then a whole section of the audience was applauding as he made his way off the stage. Joy stood there, frozen, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say something, but could not find the words. Whoopi sat back down heavily, shaking her head. Sarah Haynes looked at the camera with wide eyes, clearly uncertain what to do. Sunny Hostin was whispering something to Alyssa, who was still gripping those note cards. Well, Joy finally said, her voice tight and forced, I guess we've seen what happens when celebrities can't handle real questions. But Whoopi cut her off this time, her voice firm and serious. Joy, stop. Just stop talking. The shock on Joy's face was visible. Excuse me? We need to go to commercial, Whoopi said, looking directly at the camera. We'll be right back. The commercial break music started playing, but the cameras caught just a few more seconds before cutting away. Joy was arguing with Whoopi, her arms gesturing wildly. Sarah had her head in her hands. Sunny was on her phone, probably texting someone about what had just happened. Alyssa was staring at the empty seat where Pedro had been sitting just moments before, looking like she had witnessed something she would never forget. The audience was buzzing with conversation, everyone turning to their neighbors to process what they had just seen. Some people were recording on their phones, even though they were not supposed to. Others were shaking their heads in disbelief. A few were standing up, trying to see if Pedro was still backstage. In the green room backstage, Pedro was collecting his things. His hands were steady, his face calm. A production assistant approached him carefully. "Mr. Pascal, I am so sorry about what happened out there. That was completely unprofessional." Pedro gave them a sad smile. "It's not your fault. You all do great work here. This was about one person forgetting what this job is supposed to be about." Another staff member came over, someone who had worked on the show for years. For what it's worth, I think a lot of us have been wanting someone to stand up to that kind of behavior for a long time. "Thank you for saying what you said about mental health. My daughter struggles with anxiety, and hearing someone dismiss it like that made me so angry." Pedro's expression softened. "I'm sorry your daughter is going through that. I hope she knows that what she's feeling is real and valid. No matter what anyone says." Back on the stage, the commercial break was ending. Joy had fixed her hair and reapplied her lipstick, trying to compose herself. But you could still see the tension in her shoulders, the tightness around her mouth. The cameras came back on, and Whoopi took the lead. "We're back, and as you saw, we had an unexpected moment with our guest Pedro Pascal. We're going to take some time to reflect on what happened and come back to you with our next segment." Joy tried to jump in. "I think what we saw was—" "Joy," Whoopi's voice was sharp, cutting her off completely. "Not now." The look Joy gave Whoopi could have melted steel, but she sat back and stayed quiet. Sarah Haynes cleared her throat, trying to lighten the mood. "Why don't we talk about our next topic?" But nobody was really paying attention to the next topic. The energy in the studio had completely shifted. The audience members were still whispering to each other. The other hosts kept glancing at Joy, then away, like they were not sure what to do with her. Sunny Hostin, who had been quiet through most of the confrontation, finally spoke up during the next commercial break. The cameras were off, but microphones picked up some of it. "Joy, you need to think about what just happened. That was not okay." "Oh, so now you're all turning on me?" Joy's voice was defensive, wounded. "Nobody's turning on you," Alyssa said carefully. "But Sunny's right. The way you handled that interview crossed a line." "He was being oversensitive," Joy insisted, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. Whoopi leaned back in her chair, looking tired. "Joy, I love you, but you were out of line. You attacked that man from the moment he sat down. You wouldn't let him speak, and then you dismissed mental health struggles on national television. That's not who we are as a show." Joy looked around at her co-hosts, maybe expecting someone to back her up, but they were all looking at her with varying degrees of disappointment and concern. Sarah spoke softly. "I think we all need to have a longer conversation about this after the show. But right now, we need to get through the rest of the broadcast." The cameras came back on, and the hosts pushed through the remaining segments. But the lightness was gone. Every joke fell flat. Every transition felt awkward. The audience was distracted, still processing what they had witnessed. Meanwhile, Pedro had left the building. He walked out the side entrance, where a car was waiting for him. His publicist was on the phone, already dealing with the fallout. But Pedro just looked out the window as the car pulled away from the studio. He had come to promote a project he cared about, to have a conversation with an audience that had always supported him. Instead, he had been forced to defend himself against attacks that came out of nowhere, based on words he had never said. And when he had tried to explain, he had been shut down, mocked, and dismissed. But he had also done something important. He had stood up. He had drawn a line. He had refused to be treated poorly just because someone had a platform and thought that gave them the right to be cruel. Back at the View studio, the show finally ended. The audience filed out, were already pulling out their phones to text their friends about what they had seen. The hosts gathered their things in uncomfortable silence. Joy sat at the table for a moment after everyone else had left, staring at the empty chair where Pedro had been sitting. For just a second, her confident facade cracked, and something like doubt flickered across her face. But then she stood up, straightened her jacket, and walked off the stage with her head held high, as if nothing unusual had happened at all. The production crew started breaking down the set for the day, talking in low voices about the confrontation. Everyone had an opinion. Some thought Pedro had overreacted. Most thought Joy had pushed too far. All of them agreed that they had never seen anything quite like it in all their years working on the show. One camera operator, who had been filming talk shows for over 15 years, shook his head as he packed up his equipment. I've seen disagreements before. I've seen heated debates. But I've never seen a host attack a guest like that for no reason. And I've definitely never seen someone have the guts to just walk away. His colleague nodded. The thing is, he was so calm about it. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He didn't throw anything. He just said his piece and left. That takes real strength. You know what's going to happen now, right? The first camera operator said. This is going to be everywhere. Social media is going to explode. Everyone's going to have an opinion. And he was right, but that's not what this is about. This is about what happened in that studio. So in those few intense minutes when a beloved actor faced off against a talk show host who had forgotten that interviews are supposed to be conversations, not ambushes. It was about the moment when Joy Behar dismissed mental health as an excuse, and Pedro Pascal refused to let that statement go unchallenged. It was about the other hosts trying desperately to defuse the situation, while knowing they could not control their colleagues' behavior. It was about an audience that watched in stunned silence as civility broke down in real time. Most importantly, it was about a man who knew his worth, who understood that being a guest on a show did not mean surrendering his dignity. When Joy told him he was welcome to leave, she probably expected him to back down, to apologize, to try to smooth things over. She definitely did not expect him to actually take her up on that offer. But Pedro Pascal did exactly that. He unclipped his microphone, thanked the other hosts for their attempted kindness, and walked away from someone who had treated him with nothing but contempt from the moment the interview began. In that moment, he showed everyone watching that you do not have to accept mistreatment just because someone has power or a platform. You do not have to smile through disrespect. You do not have to let people put words in your mouth and then attack you for those fabricated statements. The confrontation lasted less than 10 minutes from start to finish, but those 10 minutes revealed everything about the people involved. Joy's need to dominate the conversation, to be right at all costs, even if it meant talking over her own colleagues. The other hosts' attempts to mediate, their clear discomfort with how Joy was behaving, the audience's shifting reactions as they realized this was not a planned bit. This was real conflict happening right in front of them. And Pedro, maintaining his composure even as he was being attacked, trying to explain himself, asking for basic respect, and finally deciding that his dignity was worth more than any publicity for his project. Some people might say he should have stayed, should have tried harder to de-escalate, should have been the bigger person and just gotten through the interview. But here's the thing about being the bigger person all the time. It means constantly swallowing your feelings, accepting poor treatment, and teaching people that they can get away with treating you badly because you will always rise above it. Pedro chose a different path. He chose to show that rising above it can also mean removing yourself from a toxic situation. That being professional does not mean being a doormat. That kindness and respect should go both ways. not just flow from guest to host, while the host gets to say whatever they want without consequences. When he placed that microphone on the table and walked away, he was making a statement that went far beyond that one interview. He was saying that mental health matters, that people's words matter, that how we treat each other matters. Joy sat there in front of the cameras and dismissed mental health struggles as people making excuses. She did that knowing millions of people were watching, knowing that some of those people were probably struggling with depression, anxiety, trauma, or other mental health challenges. She chose to belittle those struggles because she was mad at a guest who had dared to push back against her mischaracterization of his words. And when Pedro called her out on it, when he explained how dangerous that kind of rhetoric is coming from someone with such a large platform, she doubled down. She got defensive. She made it about her ego instead of about the harm her words could cause. That's what made the moment so powerful. It was not just a celebrity having a disagreement with a talk show host. It was a clash between someone who understood the weight of their words and someone who seemed to have forgotten that weight entirely. The audience knew it. You could see it in their faces, in the way some of them started applauding as Pedro walked off. They knew they had witnessed something real, something important, something that went beyond typical talk show drama. The other hosts knew it too. Whoopi's exhausted expression, Sarah's shocked silence, Sunny's hand over her mouth, Alyssa's white-knuckled grip on her note cards. They all knew that what had just happened was wrong, and they all tried in their own ways to stop it. But Joy was too far gone in her need to be right, to dominate, to win an argument that should never have been an argument in the first place. And somewhere in that studio, after the camera stopped rolling, after the audience left, after the hosts went their separate ways, the truth of what happened remained. A guest came on a show expecting a normal interview and instead got ambushed by a host with an agenda. That guest tried to respond with facts and context, but was talked over and dismissed. That guest then stood up for himself and for everyone struggling with mental health, and when the host told him to leave, he did. No yelling, no tantrums, no dramatic gestures. Just a quiet, firm decision that he deserved better treatment than what he was receiving, and a willingness to walk away when that better treatment did not materialize. That's the story of what happened on The View that day. Not what came after, not the social media reaction, not the think pieces and hot takes. Just what happened in that room, between those people, in those intense few minutes that nobody who was there will ever forget. Pedro Pascal walked onto that stage as a guest. He walked off it as someone who had drawn a line and refused to cross it, no matter who was on the other side demanding that he do so. And Joy Behar was left sitting at that table, still insisting she had done nothing wrong, while everyone around her knew differently. That was the confrontation. That was the moment. That was what happened when a beloved actor met a talk show host who had forgotten that respect is not optional and kindness is not weakness.